So my disclosures, as you heard, I'm an employee of TRiNDS. We're what we call a CRO, a contract research organization, and we work with many of the companies in the space. Our network also is the coordinating center for the academic group Synergy that has run the natural history study for over 10 years and has contributed to a lot of data that is being used by companies to plan their clinical trials and do matching. You've seen some slides from Dr. Ma where they were looking at those different changes with use of steroids, and you'll see some slides from probably other companies where we've overlapped that data to see how it functions in terms of real-world data. So in terms of clinical trials, by show of hands, how many of the families have participated in research? I expect to see many hands because Dr. Ma is our top recruiting center and has done a great job for changing the landscape in terms of clinical research. I think we have to think of it in terms of what's happened in pediatric cancer, where being part of a trial is making a difference in terms of the care. And so what we wanted to do here in this brief introduction is talk about what is a clinical trial, so hopefully everybody knows. We wanted to also discuss why sometimes they tend to be stricter than we want them to be. We also sometimes feel that they're longer than they need to be. And then how do we actually make the right decision to be informed as a voluntary choice to participate. So the key points, if you can remember anything from this introduction, is that clinical trials are experiments. They are to answer questions about a new drug. The clinical trials do need to follow some safety, ethical, and scientific rules, and it's, again, critical to ask questions when you think about participating. So what is a clinical trial? It seems like everybody may know what that is. And so I think sometimes we imagine that there's these great ideas from scientists, as we just heard, some sort of magic happens, and then we have a new treatment. So what happens really behind the scenes is that there's a lot of different stages and a lot of different projects that undergo research. We heard from a basic scientist that does a lot of that preclinical work. That tends to be that first portion where we're actually looking for leads to see if they look to have potential progress that can be made in terms of moving into humans. So that's going to be that whole preclinical. That's trials that are being done in the laboratory, in cells, sometimes in animals. They can be in mouse models up until human non-primates. And then if there's information that leads us to believe that it may be safe to move into humans, we go to what's called a phase 1. That's really the first point where we're going into humans. Oftentimes those are done in normal, healthy controls, although with Duchenne, because of the genetic involvement, some of those phase 1 may be directly in Duchenne because of, again, the nature of the genetic defect. We can't test it in somebody who does not have a particular change. And so these trials tend to be shorter and are really focused on the safety. If that looks promising, we will move to phase 2 and to larger groups. We're looking for efficacy over a little bit longer period of time. And then if, again, these look encouraging, we'll move to do extension trials or phase 3 trials where we'll have a larger group. Oftentimes that involves sometimes a placebo control, so we avoid any type of bias. And then when we get to the drug approval phase, we want to continue to follow them in the real world setting, and these would be the post-marketing or phase 4s. So I wanted to, again, spend some time comparing and contrasting being part of any type of research project. And by show of hands, it was great to see so many involved, and there's more and more opportunities that you'll hear from other speakers today in terms of participation. And even just being in a natural history plays a critical role in terms of participating and being engaged in the community. And so in terms of clinical trials, those study designs, as you saw from the previous slide, tend to be really focused and hypothesis-driven, where a question is being answered. The sample size can be smaller, and you saw from the different phases they may increase over time. And here you're looking for safety and efficacy. The length of that study may vary as well. They tend to be a little bit shorter because you're looking for safety for a very short period of time, and then you're moving to other phases where you're maybe studying something for 2 or 3 years. And that ultimate goal of a clinical trial will be drug approval. Versus natural history, which is the real world setting where we're trying to see what happens without any type of controlled setting of a drug being introduced. And these will be larger because we want to see the broad spectrum of the disease. We want to understand the disease better. and we want to do this for a longer period of time, and we're really trying to gather information to, again, help inform those disease trajectories that we can then compare to drug approvals, ultimately. So some of the activities that happen when you participate in research, one of the first things that you'll do is actually discuss the informed consent and what really happens in that clinical project. And so key elements that are going to be in your informed consent are going to be the nature of what the treatment or the study is. What are some of the possible alternatives? What are some of the risks and benefits of being in that project? And again, it's very important to have an opportunity for questions. All informed consents will contain the phone number of somebody independent to the study so that you can have, again, non-biased, being able to be informed on your decisions to participate in the project. There'll be tests that will see if that intervention is safe, and so you may do frequent blood draws, physical exams, x-rays to see if there's any impact from these interventions. There'll be tests to look to see if the drug is actually working, so you'll meet with physical therapists, such Angela, and you heard from her next, of some of the different tests. There could be biopsies to look to see if the production of dystrophin is changing, breathing tests to see if the lungs are functioning any different from that intervention. And then there's certain blood tests that are being done repeatedly over time to see how the drug may flow through the body or respond in terms of its length in the body. So why are some of these trials so strict? And so sometimes they're really being put in place to protect you. So there's rules to protect the safety of every patient, to making sure you're not taking other medications that may interfere or interact with some of the drugs that we're testing. There's rules to protect the rights, so that's where, again, a lot of that paperwork of the informed consent is explaining to protect you in terms of what can you do, when can you withdraw, your completely voluntary participation. And then the rules to create good data, so we want to make sure it can be reproducible across multiple centers. That's really been a mission of the network synergy of making sure worldwide we have trials that can be then, again, comparable so that we can push towards drug approvals across multiple countries to help expedite approvals. We try to have the same physical therapist test throughout because we want to reduce that variability. We tend to say to the parents, sorry, you can't watch the assessments because we don't want any type of influences where maybe the parents are going to change the way their child is going to perform the test because the parents are either cheering or said you're going to get this extra treat if you do it and they're watching them. So these are things that we've really put in place to have something very controlled. And so then the big one that is often very difficult is why do some of the trials take so long? And I think it's ultimately thinking back to that picture where you see all the different phases. You have to go through multiple steps to make sure you're truly having an intervention that is safe. And there's a lot of steps and things that go and happen behind the scenes. You have to have that protocol that everybody's going to be following across all the centers. You have to select all the investigators and being able to make sure that they are at a trained center, that they have trained staff. You have to get the approvals of all these independent committees that are really there in place to protect the rights and safety of the patients. You need to recruit families, and so Dr. Ma's done a great job in recruiting many of her families into research, but we need to have that happen at other centers as well so we can have everybody participate at the same time, complete the trials at the same time, and push towards approvals. All the data then needs to be entered, monitored, reviewed. We have to do a lot of statistical analyses of all that data and then present it to the community and ultimately file for approvals. The key questions you need to ask when you're considering to participate in research is obviously first, why is the study even being done? How does the study intervention work? So what is that mechanism of action? If my son has a particular mutation that's focusing on a particular genotype, is that how this mechanism of this drug works? So those are the types of questions you want to consider. What are the risks of the possible intervention? Have they been done in other stages? Have they been done in other patients that have Duchenne that are the same age? Are there study visits different from regular care? So I'm going to have to come more frequently. When I come more frequently, what am I actually doing? And then what happens to my regular care? Do I continue to see my regular doctor? How frequently? So these are important questions for you to consider when participating in any type of research. In terms of the procedures, what are the tests actually like? What kind of supports are there put in place by the programs? What are the risks of some of the tests? And what would I know if we're in the study? So what kind of information will you be provided once you've participated after 12 months, 24 months? And then what happens when the study is over and all the participants have completed their participation? And then there's the logistics and what happens with everyday life. And so what support is available to the families in the study? What does the schedule, how does it work with scheduling with work? How can we actually get to the study visits? What about insurance? Does it change the coverage? Will this study fit with the work, school, siblings, hobbies, travel, and other family obligations? And so these are important things to consider when participating. And what about the family vacations, summer camps, or any type of split custody? So just to kind of close this first part off, we wanted to just remember that a clinical trial is an experiment. We don't know if it will work or not, and this is why we're doing this. Clinical trials do need to follow safety, ethical, and scientific rules. And again, reminder to ask many questions if you're thinking about being in a trial. It's your choice, and you can always change your mind. So I just want to put that last thing and thank everybody for participating in research, because this is how we move some of the research forward.